Nomad for about 2.5 years, and she is now based in Sark. So, Dominique, would you just like to say a few words to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about the story to introduce yourself to the audience today?
Yes, of course. Yeah, so my name is Dominique, and I'm half German, half French. And I used to live with my husband in a big city in Germany, in Cologne. And yeah, until like 2.5 years, about 2.5 years ago. And then we decided that we wanted to leave Germany because of several reasons. We had the feeling that the society in Germany, or the whole system, is degrading. And so many things are not working anymore. So there's a lot of bureaucracy, hardly any digitalization, less safety. So there are many reasons. Apart from that, my husband has always used to work independently. And I used to work for companies. We both studied economics. But yeah, 2.5 years ago, we said this is the perfect moment to leave the country, and also to explore other countries, maybe for a new base. And that's how the whole idea of nomadism, or digital nomadism, how you call it, was born. Before leaving, my husband registered in Estonia a company, and it's so-called e-residency, because Estonia is very forward in digitalization. Yeah, then we left for many different countries. So we've been traveling the last 2.5 years. First, we went to several countries in Latin America. And then we went to several countries in Europe. We spent about 3 months in Tenerife, so in Spain, that's Canary Islands. Then also Poland, the Netherlands, always with the interest to get to know the countries a little bit more, to get to know the culture, but also with the search for maybe a new base for us. We also went to Asia, which is also very known amongst digital nomads. And yes, last year with COVID, of course, we realized that traveling by plane would be more and more difficult. And so we decided to buy a car and traveled to France, and wanted to stay there for 3 months. But then we heard about this initiative in Sark that was launched by a German entrepreneur who wanted to attract new inhabitants to Sark. And we really liked the idea, because Sark, to be honest, we didn't know it before at all. I mean, the Channel Islands, yes, but Sark, we hadn't heard it before. So yeah, we thought, why not try it out? And then we spontaneously took our car, drove to Saint-Malo, and parked our car there, took the ferries to Sark. And since we've been here, we haven't regretted our decision yet, or I think we won't ever, because we're really happy to be here. We've been welcomed very friendly by the residents, by the seigneur and his family. The island is beautiful. There's less bureaucracy, that's for sure. It's safe. There are a lot of other new arrivals, new people coming from all over the world who heard about this initiative. So I think it's about 150 people, families also, and it's been really a great time. And now, of course, for us personally, there's also something that has also convinced us that SAC could be a really great base for us. Because we're having a baby in July, so this is also that we think that SAC is a nice place to have a base, and from that we'll see. I mean, technically we are not nomads at the moment, of course. I mean, we can't travel at the moment, also because of COVID. But our idea is to stay here for about 6 months, or more, but preferably in the warmer month, and then have one or two other places where we are going during the year. And of course, sometimes also go home to see our families in Germany and and family and friends.
Thank you, Dominique. That's really interesting. And it's particularly interesting to hear about the German connection and what attracted you to SARC in the first instance. But there's a nice segue there as well, because you've been here, or a digital nomad, for the 2.5 years. And now we're going to move to our Northern Isle and to Nigel, who is what I would say is a remote worker and was actually almost pioneering this and working in the digital space in the late 90s or 80s, I think, Nigel. So can you share with us your experience and story?
Yeah, thank you, John. I just want to check on the audio quality, first of all. How's that?
That's all good.
Okay, good. I don't want it to sound like I'm much more of an old fossil than I am, but I live in Alderney, as John said. I'm a director of a Los Angeles-based company called ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, and I'm a director of the of ChannelIsles.net, which Island Networks Group, which runs .gg and .je. In fact, we founded them back in 1996. I came to Alderney in about the end of 1999, beginning of 2000, after we started the local internet domain registry. So in the years that I've been here, I spent a lot of time working remotely, both remotely for the local registry when I've been traveling and been the other side of the world, and for the international organization when I've been sitting here. So it seems that whether I'm here or whether I'm there, I'm still remote working no matter what I'm doing. So we've been working on the development of the unique system of identifiers for the internet for over 20 years. Since this time last year, in common with everybody else, things have changed. I haven't left Alderney except for 2 very short trips to Guernsey. I haven't been to the UK mainland in close to a year now, and that's quite an unusual thing. And of course, during that last 12 months, I've continued my work with ICANN in Los Angeles, using things like Zoom and Skype and all of the tools that we've come to know, and in fact that we're using now, as well as working here locally in the office for ChannelIsles.net. And of course, during the current period of lockdown and during the first period of lockdown, I was remote working between here and the centre of Alderney. It's really strange. We weren't able to go into the office and technically still aren't. I mean, although we're classified, I think, as essential workers in that we're doing telecommunications essential work, we do have 2 people who are classed as vulnerable in the COVID. So we've chosen to set up a remote working system whereby the 3 people who normally work in the office here are actually working from home and not going into the office. So, John, that's basically my story so far.
Yeah, Nigel, thank you very much for that. And I think, again, one of the themes from the earlier session, it was about the importance of connectivity. And as you say, that's been a core part of your business operations ever since you've been operating from Alderney. And finally, we're going to come back to Guernsey and our third panelist, and this is Louise, who has, I think I can call you a seasoned nomad because you're over that 3-year period. So Louise, share your story, please.
Yeah, so I've been a nomad now for, to be honest, I've lost count, about 6, 7, 8 years, something like that. And that means that basically since I graduated, I have just been hopping around countries every kind of 2 or 3 months, sometimes up to 6 months if I'm feeling very static. So 2020 was a weird year for that. We didn't really manage to do any travel. But on that journey, my husband and I have run a whole bunch of different companies. At the moment, I run an Amazon store in Australia, and I make online courses, and I do a like mentoring community kind of coaching group. But I've done all kinds of things. I was a journalist for a bit. I've been a personal assistant, all kinds of things. And throughout our journey of traveling, we've obviously been doing the work and travel combo, but we've always been looking for a place where we can base ourselves. My family are from the south coast of England, so pretty close to here. We can almost wave to them from the island. And we came here last summer, the same as Dominique, because we heard there was no COVID. And the way of a nomad is to choose whichever country is the best in the world right now. So normally we choose somewhere that is sunny, unless we're doing skiing or something. That's normally our criteria, somewhere where there's interesting group of people, and good weather. But last year, the best place in the world was places that didn't have COVID. So for us, that was Guernsey. So we came here for the summer while I was pregnant, and then we went back to England for Christmas, and then we just came back here to get caught pretty much exactly in time for lockdown. But we're now setting up a base here. We're in the process of buying a house and establishing local companies and all that kind of thing. So our plan is to make Guernsey our long-term base, which is not something we were expecting, but I'm pretty sure that is the age-old Guernsey story of came for a week, stayed for a lifetime. So hopefully that's going to be our story as well.
Lovely, thank you very much for that. So now we've just briefly been introduced to our panelists, and it just leaves me the pleasure of introducing my co-host David, who's going to lead us through some of the Q&A, but based on the discussions that we heard earlier. So David, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. Oops. Thank you very much, John. I did a bit of research into digital nomads this morning, knowing that I was expecting to ask some intelligent questions this evening. And one of the most interesting facts that I came across was that it's estimated that there will be something like 1 billion digital nomads by the year 2035. And I thought it was quite an interesting figure. Certainly, it's a relatively new phenomena. I think that's the correct pronunciation. But the other thing that came out of the earlier meeting, and I think is really important, is the fact that the difference between a digital nomad and a remote worker. And quite simply, we have, as you explained earlier, 2 digital nomads who have spent, certainly between them, the last few years traveling to different jurisdictions and working there. And then on the other hand, we've got someone like Nigel, who I've known for the last 20 years, when he first came to Alderney, and he has built a very successful business here in Alderney with as a domain name provider, and also has proved himself to be an expert on domain names as a result of being chosen to be a director of ICANN. So we've got some interesting people here in the Bailiwick. I'd like to start by asking Louise a question. Louise, I understand that you like to be known as Digital Nomad Girl. I'm not quite sure where that came from, but you never spend more than 3 months, or you corrected me earlier and said up to a maximum of 6 months in any one country. What was the attraction of being a digital nomad in the first instance?
Yeah, we kind of discovered it by accident. I've always loved to travel, but normally you would think that travel is like you're backpacking or you're going on holiday, and you couldn't do it for your whole life. That would just be mad. And so
we were living and working in London and self-employed, so our work was irrelevant to our location. And obviously London was really expensive and cold, and we weren't really seeing many of our friends because they live all so spread out and, you know, getting the tube for an hour or whatever. And so we decided to move to Thailand because the cost of living was so low, the weather was amazing. And when we got there, we discovered there was this awesome community of people doing the same thing. So Chiang Mai in Thailand is kind of the global hub of where digital nomads tend to go to start out, because the cost of living is so cheap that even when you're just starting out running a business, you can have an excellent quality of life living there. So that's where most people go when they're first starting. And once we went there and we discovered that's what this whole community of people were doing, and we hadn't invented it, it was already a thing, we decided to then carry on for many, many years until now, where we're starting to think we'd quite like to have a base. And I used to have a YouTube channel which was about fashion, but once we became Nomads, I decided to kind of rebrand, and that's where Digital Nomad Girl came from, because there wasn't many women in the industry. It was mostly guys, lots of American men talking about being nomads, and I thought it'd be nice to have a different voice in the industry. So that's kind of where that name has come from. But I might have to rebrand again if we're going to base ourselves in Guernsey long term and stop traveling as much. But yeah, it's been a really fun few years, and it's a really nice way to see the world because it's much more sustainable. You know, you can travel then for 7 years without backpacking or something. You would never be able to do that because you obviously need money coming in. And this, we've found, has been a perfect hybrid. So yeah, we've had a great time.
It's interesting. I wouldn't describe myself as a digital nomad, but once upon a time I described myself as an executive gypsy. I was involved in Formula One and ended up working in something like 55 countries over my career. So yeah, I know the kind of things you're talking about, and it is fascinating. It really opens your eyes to what the world is really all about. Dominique, as with Louise, you've only spent 3 months in any one country. How would you describe your life as a digital nomad over the past 2.5 years?
Very diverse, very interesting. Also, I think eye-opening for our personal lives, that you really realize how few things you need, for example. So it's like also learning about life. Maybe it sounds cheesy, but we're only traveling with 2, now with a car, 3, but before flying with 2 big bags. So you really realize that you don't need a lot. And so I like the idea of minimalism also now. So now that we rent a cottage in Sark, I try not to buy too many things, because it's really so freeing to get rid of things. Yeah, it's also, of course, very eye-opening in terms of cultural things, that you realize that many things you learn from media, of course, are not true of other countries. It's always best to get in contact with the people in the different countries. Yeah, I mean, it's cheesy, but it's life-changing. And as also Louise said, it's I don't know how you said exactly, but it's yeah, you get to, if you once you started, you don't want to stop it. And yeah, hope this answers your question.
Yeah, you answer it very well. Back to Louise. Many people seem to think that being a digital nomad is like being on an extended vacation. How do digital nomads earn a living, especially when it seems that you've had as many jobs or careers as you have lived in countries?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very different to being on a vacation. But it depends how you want to shape it, I suppose. So a lot of nomads I know are in a really hardcore entrepreneur category, where they work all the hours God sends and there's no vacation time. You know, they make it to the beach just long enough to take an Instagram and then they're back in the office. But then there's other people who have prioritized lifestyle much more. So perhaps they're an online yoga instructor. They just do 1 class in the morning to make enough money to put a roof over their head, and they spend the rest of the time at the gym and on the beach and hanging out. So as with anything self-employed or remote work, you can choose your boundaries. And so some people, it's much more of a vacation for than others. We tend to take a weekend kind of midweek to avoid the tourist rush. And nomads kind of like to think they're kind of separate to the tourists because you're there for so much longer. So you have a favorite restaurant, you have a gym membership, you've got a local SIM card, like you're much more integrated into the local community, more like expats, I suppose. But definitely quite different to people who are there on holiday. For example, you're probably living in a residential area in an Airbnb rather than in a hotel. And yeah, like I said, you've got local restaurants, all that kind of thing. You're maybe like going out to nightclubs, and it's much more of a local experience than if you were there on vacation. And in terms of making money, the whole spectrum really. So some people, like I said, are self-employed. A lot of people will have a remote job. A lot of Americans tend to just have a job for an American company. And then they're kind of juggling the time zone of working, living in Thailand, but working for an American company. And now so many companies are letting people work from home. And often from home means wherever you have internet. So it seems like it's definitely becoming increasingly possible to make an income in one of those spectrum options.
Just very quickly, is being a digital nomad a long-term career?
I think it depends. We've met people who've been nomads for decades. A lot of people kind of retire when they have kids, similar to us. Yeah. But we do know people who are traveling with kids. A lot of people doing homeschooling. There's kind of a family community in Costa Rica and in Bali where they've got like green school, which is kind of like Montessori, like hippie nomad vibes. So yeah, you can do it forever. A lot of people don't. It can get tiring, but depends.
That's a pretty good answer. Nigel, I didn't want you to feel that you're being left out. While I suspect you've notched up a few air miles in your time, you can hardly describe yourself as a digital nomad. So how do you run your business from a small rock in the English Channel?
Well, the internet is a big part of it. It sounds a no-brainer nowadays. Everybody uses the internet. It's like you turn the tap on and there's water there. You expect to have the internet. Wasn't the case when we set up in Alderney. We set up with one phone line. And then shortly thereafter, and that was in the days of dial-up internet. And some of you are too young to even remember that. Then we were lucky enough or fortunate enough that we were able to get what was then Guernsey Telecoms, which David was on the board of at the time.
For my sins.
Called ISDN, which provided what was then a really fast, not quite broadband, it was 128K, so it was two phone lines bonded together. And our first office, which we opened in about 2000, middle of 2000, down in the bottom of Victoria Street, we actually had 6 phone lines running into it, and 2 of which we used exclusively for the internet. There are some challenges being here. I remember somebody talking earlier in the day about what it's like to get Amazon parcels on Sark. Well, it's not that much different here. The boat's not come in today, so there'll be no eggs in the shops, and we'll see how things are tomorrow. But by and large, the advantages are vast. I mean, there's no issue with security. People deliberately leave their doors unlocked and windows open and so on. There's occasional bits and pieces of crime, but not much. I think people talk about Alderney having one of the lowest levels of reported crime in the world. I think the clue's in the word reported, actually, but it's actually proved quite interesting because as we've developed, we've been able to maintain the same level of service to the customers, most of which were in Guernsey and Jersey. And it was quite interesting when we set up. There were a couple of people who thought, who's this guy from outside the islands? And the story went round, oh, well, that's just 2 guys in a garage in Alderney with a dog. In a way, that was quite a compliment because Hewlett-Packard and Amazon were both founded in garages. But they were wrong. There was no garage and there was no dog. And literally, I was doing what Louise and Dominique were doing. I rented a small place opposite the Murray Hall public house, and was working from my laptop in the small, tiny land. It was a one-bedroom cottage. Until about 3 months later, we secured offices and took it from there.
You've done very well, Nigel.
So there you go, David. That's how it goes.
There we go. Dominique, back to you. How important are good communications to digital nomads? Bit of a no-brainer, really.
You mean communication with the residents? Or,
No, I'm talking about digital communications, connectivity, as they like to say. In other words, you know, if you are traveling and your only means of communicating with the world is your laptop, your iPad and your smartphone.
Yeah. I mean, good internet connection is like the most important thing. And the funny thing is also, when we heard about SARC, my husband was a little hesitant because he said, oh, you know, all the main things we'd like to check sound great, but I'm not sure if this little island has great internet connection. But it turned out that that's no joke. It's much better than in many regions in Germany. So the connection is great. So yeah, of course. I mean, communication is everything. Digital communication.
Actually, a lot of people don't know this, but at one stage, Alderney had the best internet connection in the Bailiwick, and yeah, it's that was a while ago, but it's still pretty good. Nigel, I'm sure you'd agree with what Dominic has just said. The pandemic has clearly shown how important good communications are to remote workers, particularly those living on islands.
Absolutely correct. And what it's also shown is that it's very easy to start to rely on things that maybe, let's put it this way, you need to think very carefully about what your plan B is. Maybe it's always longer ago than you think, but it not that many years ago, 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago, there was a major incident in Alderney where there was a power surge or something like that.
Internet out.
And it completely took out significant parts of the telecoms infrastructure in Alderney. And there was no part, and it was not able to be got to the island for, I think, about 4 days, something like that, during which the internet connectivity was ground to a halt. You could maybe get 2G on one of the 3 mobile phone providers, and that brought it really quite home. And I went out and bought a satellite internet backup system, which, of course, if you know anything about satellite, that it's not at all suitable. There are all sorts of disadvantages to satellite internet, but at least it's an alternative. So. Yeah. How many times shall I say yes to your question, David?
No, you're absolutely right, and I remember that incident very well. However, I was able to switch from my standard broadband to using my mobile phone as a hub and continued working. Louise, what other things are important to digital nomads?
We similarly to Dominique, the first thing we Googled when we heard about Guernsey was how good is the internet connection? But then the next thing we Googled is there a co-work? And I don't think we've ever gone to a city that doesn't have a co-work. That was a huge factor for us. And actually, we nearly chose Jersey because we saw they had a co-work. It took us a while to find the Guernsey co-work. But once we found it, we were like, okay, great, Guernsey it is. And so that's a huge factor for us because that's how we meet people, because we arrive off the plane and we have no friends, no family, no connections. You know, we don't know where the supermarket is. We know nothing. And so co-works for us are really, really important. And actually, I have to say that Digital Greenhouse is one of the best ones we've been to because it's not flashy, you know, there's nothing particularly special when you arrive. You don't think like, wow, this is stunning. We've been in ones that have amazing mountain views or have a pool or whatever. But the thing that we loved about the Guernsey one was that it was so welcoming. And quite often people are kind of, they've got their headphones on, they're just working, they're busy. And I get that. But the Guernsey one was really, really welcoming immediately. And people introduced themselves and they said like, oh, you must meet my brother-in-law. He also is in a similar niche, and come round for dinner. And people were unbelievably welcoming. And we've never had that warm of a welcome before. So for us, that has been the best thing about the co-working Guernsey. And I think it made our landing a lot softer. And then you meet people who introduce you to people, and before you know it, you're moving here because you feel like you have a community of friends.
Louise, moving on to something entirely different, did you watch the previous webinar?
Yeah.
You did. Well, you'd have seen the lady from Madeira describing about their plans to set up a digital village in Madeira. Mm-hmm. Do you think that would be a good move for Guernsey, Alderney or Sark?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with, I guess people, hopefully everyone watched the previous thing, and Rosanna, who was saying that there's different streams of nomads. And I think Guernsey is going to need to attract the stream of nomads who are already quite well established, who are already making decent money, maybe are at a similar age of us, like starting to think about having kids, interested in safety, that kind of thing. Not so much of like the beach in Thailand kind of party age, and not so much looking for a really, really budget option. You know, when we moved to Chiang Mai, you're thinking, what's the cheapest place I can live that has a good quality of life? And I think Guernsey's going to be looking for more established nomads who are looking at setting up a company, taking advantage of all those kind of structures here and how that's all really straightforward. And so I think a digital nomad village, yes, would be great. You know, I would love it. I would definitely move there. But I think you're not going to be able to have space for a lot of people. So you're going to need to attract the right quality of people, I think. And I imagine the village in Madeira is probably going to be a bit more on a mass scale, where they're just trying to get a lot of young people doing kind of co-living and all that kind of thing. And I'm not sure that that vibe will necessarily suit the Bailiwick, although I would totally move in there. I think it sounds great.
It sounded exciting to me as well. But
yeah.
Dominique, based on your experience, do you think digital nomads or remote workers could benefit tourism and other aspects of the economy in the Bailiwick of Guernsey?
Yes, of course. I mean, specifically, I think for Sark, do you mean in general or specifically for Sark?
Whichever.
I mean, of course, I would say digital nomads bring money in terms of you need accommodation. So we always stayed in Airbnbs. So I think the Airbnb industry or the accommodation tourism industry is also has profits from nomads. And now specifically speaking for Sark, I mean, as far as I know, the average age is 62 or so here. So of course, with the influx of younger families, this of course is very interesting and this was of course the point of the whole initiative. Sven, the German entrepreneur, I think he did it together with Christopher Beaumont. They wanted to attract new, younger people and especially families to kind of give the island some life back. And so, of course, I mean, we rent houses. For example, the supermarket here, or one of the supermarkets, it's better to say like a little shop, the food stop. The owner told me that they are nearly had to close it down in summer because of the lack of people buying food. So even the remaining residents bought a lot of food on Amazon. So now with the new influx of people, they have lots of people buying, and so they say they even have too much work now. So this is, I think, a perfect example that the nomads or the new people who are mostly nomads like us, give life back or bring benefits. Yes.
Dominic.
David, I'm going to jump in at this point, if that's okay, because we've got about 20 minutes left, and I know we've got a number of questions that have come into the chat. So I'd like to start picking those up, but if I may. And the first one that came in was James, who was commenting on one of the issues that was raised in the earlier session. And we talk about the growing number of digital nomads that are now operating. And we kind of talk of them as a homogenous group, but actually that they're very kind of, there are niche groups within that. And there's a question that James asked, what do you think Guernsey, Sark and Alderney can excel at in terms of the niche? Are they going to appeal to certain types of nomads? So I'm going to ask that question to Louise, Dominique, and then Nigel. So starting with you, Louise, what do you think Guernsey could excel at?
Yeah, so I think mainly that stuff I was saying earlier, that's what we've been saying to our nomad friends, people who are a similar age to us, who have been on the road now for kind of 6 years and are thinking maybe they'd like to have a base, and they don't necessarily want to spend 365 days in one place, but they're thinking maybe 6 months of a year with, you know, trips in between. And we've been pitching Guernsey to them as a place which is native English speaking. So our friends who are South African, Australian, American, but mostly our friends who are British, who want to be like somewhere where it's native English, but it's not that far from families. Like we would love to move to Australia, but it's just too far from our family in the UK. So we were looking for somewhere which is English and close to our family, but still has like a good work-life balance, has a good community of people with a similar mindset to us, ideally has a bit of kind of island life with some beaches and that kind of thing. And for us, the thing that we really liked about Guernsey is the work-life balance and the quality of life. And so in my opinion, I'm biased because I'm in that niche, but I think that niche would be really good of like kind of new parents, because I get the impression you have a lot of people who move away for university, do a bit of a London career thing, and then they move back here to have their kids. So we found a lot of really interesting people our age who have moved away and are now relocating back here. So I would probably put the nomads in a similar bucket. And then those are also nomads who can afford to move to Guernsey. You know, you can't be just starting out kind of bootstrapping, living off like $500 a month. You couldn't be doing that in Guernsey. So in my opinion, that's probably the niche.
That's really interesting. And it's kind of addressing the aging demographics as well that we face in the Channel Islands more generally. So thank you, Louise. Dominique, same question to you in terms of what do you think?
Yeah,
I'm fascinated to know about the German connection.
I would second, how do you say it? Second, what I would repeat what Louise has said. It's mostly, I'd say it's rather older people, or not older people, but not like the new nomad at the beginning of his 20s. So it's more like people in their 30s or older who need some money, because I mean the Bailiwick is in comparison to many other countries, even other countries in Europe, quite expensive. And I mean in comparison to Asia, no question, Asia is very cheap to live there. So the people need some money to live here. I also would think of like one group amongst these, I wouldn't call them necessarily nomads, but digital entrepreneurs or digital investors. Many of them work in the blockchain area, so like with cryptocurrencies. And so these people are also interested in having, how do you say, a multi-locality. So that means they want to change the places where they live during the year, but it's maybe not 10 places in a year like before, like the typical nomad, but only 3 or 4, and have a base where they also, I can speak for myself and my husband, we really want less bureaucracy, more the digitalization. This is also why I mentioned. This is also why I mentioned it at the beginning. I mean, my husband registered his company in Estonia, and Estonia is really, really very, how do you say, advanced in terms of digitalization. So if he wants to do his tax or his tax work, he just takes his card, his residency card. It's like a chip card, puts it into his laptop, and then does it in like 20 minutes. And so in comparison to Germany, this is like a dream come true, you know. Yeah. So I think it's people who say we want to have clearer regulations in terms of tax and administration. Safety, as Louis said. I think it's also people who are in another period of their life where they decide to have family. So safety is a very important thing for kids, for having kids, and so.
Thanks, Dominique. And finally, Nigel, to yourself, where can Alderney excel? Who will it attract?
Well, I'm going to be quick because I think David needs to move on to another question. I'm going to say Alderney's niche is that, despite what's just been said, that it's cheap. Now, obviously, there's a certain level of income. You can't come here and on the same kind of budget that you could go to Thailand on. On the other hand, for middle income groups up to the very wealthy, it's incredibly good value compared with Guernsey, for example. I mean, we've had a rash of people from Guernsey buying up property here recently, but up until very recently, the price of houses to buy was something like 10 or 20% less than places like Ipswich and Norwich. And couple that with the fact that you can move here and use it as your base. We'll come on to the tax question in a moment, but let's just say that the tax regime here is even better than it would be in Guernsey for some people. And of course, there's the security that we talked about before. So, and that's been echoed too. So, I think Alderney's niche is that it's undiscovered, and you can come here.
Brilliant, thank you.
As you suggested earlier on, there's an important question that's come up from Chris Blinn and Catherine Bliss, and they want to know, can you ask the question regarding source or tax point? In other words, where does the nomad or the digital nomad pay tax? I'm going to ask Dominique that question first, and then maybe come back to you, Nigel.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, company-wise, it's in Estonia because the company is registered in Estonia, but they have a regulation that you only pay as soon as you take money out of it. So that means if you invest the money again, your earnings, if you invest it in your company again, you don't have to pay taxes, and the taxes are flat 20%. So this also makes it easier. And yeah, I mean, personal wise, it's always where we haven't been registered during these 2.5 years. So that means if you stay under the 3-month time, or you can stay until 3 months in one country before being tax, how do you say, that you have to pay taxes. So you have to stay under a certain amount of days. So, but now, of course, we are registered here, and then it's the personal tax in SARC that is being paid. Yes.
And of course, tax in SARC is separate to tax in Guernsey and Alderney. So, Nigel, do you want to add something to that?
Oh, yeah, very much. And in fact, the question of taxation is not really a simple question. It's a very long piece of string. And it depends on the rules that engage in the countries that are engaged in your life. And if you have more than one country engaged in your life, it can get complicated quite quickly. And not just the countries where you spend time. It can involve the country of your nationality, for example. The obvious example of that is colleagues of mine who are US citizens. And if you're a US citizen and you're resident in a country where you think you've got a good tax deal, it doesn't matter. You've still got to pay income tax to the United States government. There are obviously mitigating strategies, which every US expat knows. I have family connections with Germany, which I won't go into in detail at the moment, but there are particular considerations for moving from Germany to Guernsey or any of the Channel Islands, which don't apply if you move from Guernsey to, say, the United Kingdom, even after Brexit. Generally speaking, it's correct that if you spend less than 90 days in any country, it's relatively unproblematic. But a simple example, you only have to spend a couple of weeks in the UK. And if you are having income that derives from the UK, you're supposed to register for tax and pay that tax. Doesn't matter that you've only been there 10 days or something. The UK tax, I mean, in practice, if you go there and you're sitting on your laptop in a Costa Coffee in the middle of London while you're on holiday, nobody's going to bother you. But that's the general thing. Now, in some countries, come back to Germany, which I know, it's relatively unproblematic to spend up to 183 days in the country, providing your income doesn't arise in the country. Some countries, and Thailand's been mentioned earlier, have a semi-official policy of deliberate and benign neglect. And if you have a visa that allows you to come in as a tourist for 90 or 180 days, and you do the visa run by driving out of the country for a couple of hours and driving back in and getting another few days. Some people have lived in those countries for decades and decades and decades. The name for that is PT, or perpetual tourist. But every once in a while you find that governments in places like Colombia and Costa Rica or even Asian countries have a change of government and clamp down on it. So it's best not to rely on those sorts of things, and to look for a place where it's a bit more predictable lifestyle in terms of paying tax.
I think don't
want to knock on the door, do you?
I think at that point, Nigel, there's some other interesting questions that are popping up, and I'm going to hand back to John.
Thanks, David. There's a segue here about the tax question, because I know that Cayman, for example, is attracting digital nomads and offering 2 years tax-free, because they're looking at them presumably to encourage people to come and spend money there. So they're almost replacing the tourists. So they're trying to bring people in to spend money locally. And there was an interesting point made earlier in the earlier session about the attraction and the marketing for digital nomads and remote working is occasionally being done by the tourist department, and then also occasionally done by economic development or startup operations like Madeira, for example. And there's a question that's come in from Roland that kind of builds on this, and just extracting the relevant bit. Can you outline the benefits that nomads offer to the communities you commute through? Is it the attraction of people to settle, as you have, engendering new ideas and concepts? And what do you see as the negative? So perhaps if I could just pick on you, Louise, would you like to answer that one based on your experience?
Yeah. So I think just on a day-to-day basis, nomads spend a bunch of money in the country, which is not derived from that country. So, we make money in the UK, for example, and we spend it all in Thailand. And so for that, it's just a huge net inbound of cash. And we probably don't spend as much per day as a tourist would, because a tourist is out doing activities. But we definitely spend more than a local, because we're staying in a hotel or whatever, and then we're eating out for all of our meals, and we're doing some kind of touristy things on weekends. So I think nomads are very good consumers, even though the same as Dominique, we're very minimalist. We're not buying any belongings, but we're buying a lot of experiences and meals and that kind of thing. And then in the longer term, well, I guess in the medium term, then they're also trying to integrate into the local community as best as possible. It depends on the culture. Sometimes that's easier, sometimes that's harder. But we'll certainly be trying to meet local people, encouraging entrepreneurship, giving an international perspective, all that kind of thing, which I think can really benefit, get like a young online perspective integrated into your community. And then also long term, it's reasonably likely we'll establish a company there. So we've had companies in a bunch of different countries, from being on accelerator programs and incubators in those countries. So for example, we now have an Australian company where we're doing Amazon in Australia. And so that then serves that local community that they have another supplier or whatever. And we've done that in lots of countries that we've been to. And then you end up with local employment. You know, we will meet someone in Australia who ended up becoming a long-term employee for us for many years. And so I guess it just encourages the entrepreneurial aspect long term, and maybe they'll settle, but obviously they're only going to settle in one country. So it's a bit of a harder sell to get them to settle in yours. But I think short term, you're spending money, and longer term, there's a bit of an economic boost of companies and mindset and that kind of thing.
John, I'll take the next question. This is a question to in fact all of you, just a quick brief answer. But given the digital connectivity and the benefits that EGaming has brought to the Bailiwick, do you think local politicians are missing a trick? In other words, what could they do to encourage digital nomads and remote working in the Bailiwick? I'll start with you, Louise, as you're smiling.
Never smile, rookie error. What's the best thing they can do to encourage? I think a challenge for us was finding short-term accommodation when we first arrived. I'm not sure entirely what the solution for that would be, but that was quite a challenge. And I've been constantly Instagramming about how great Guernsey is, and lots of my nomad friends are asking me, you know, we'd love to come and check out Guernsey. How is it? And I'm saying it's great, but I don't know where you're going to stay, because there's like 3 Airbnbs and we're in one of them. And so we're saying like, don't worry, we're going to buy a house and you can come stay with us, but that's got a bit of a lead time. So I think short to medium term accommodation, I think, would really, really help with encouraging nomads. Because word of mouth will spread. We're already spreading it personally, but nomads are always looking for like the next place to go and where should we get our base, and everyone's always talking. So I think you actually almost don't need to do marketing, especially if you want that group of nomads that I was talking about who are a bit more experienced, a bit more established, have maybe sold a company or two. Those people are already talking to each other. I think places like Barbados, where they're doing like a nomad visa and it's kind of flashy, I think that's more aiming at the beginner nomads who don't have that little network of people quietly talking about where's good. So I think if you can make it good for existing nomads, then word will spread. And for me, the biggest barrier for that was accommodation.
Nigel, you wanted to add a little twist to that. If you could keep it brief, then we've got time for one more question from John.
Yeah, well, you mentioned e-gaming. One thing I was just going to suggest is, by gaming, I'm sure you meant gambling, as in the old gambling industry. But there's another form of gaming, which is esports, which is becoming quite a big thing. So maybe we should be encouraging esports celebrities to come here, particularly given that they all seem to be adopting Guernsey by proxy anyway, using .gg as the extension.
I see. John, over to you for one last question.
Okay. Oh, this is challenging because we've still got some there, but let me go with I guess, let's talk about the future. And the question that came up was, is being a digital nomad, is that going to be environmentally sustainable in a world where maybe travel is going to be more expensive and the pressure on carbon emissions? So I guess it's digital nomads, and I know David was talking about the expected numbers going forward. But is this environmentally friendly? Who would like to go first with that one? Dominique.
Well, of course, I mean, flying, I think we are all on the same page, is not sustainable. But as I mentioned before, I'm very much now into minimalism. So I don't consume very much, much less than before. And in comparison also to our friends who stayed in, or I mean, who are living the normal life in Germany, you know, they built their new house, they buy a lot of stuff, they fill the house with the stuff, and yeah, so you can also look at this point. This is something we don't do anymore. And also we try to eat locally. So what I really like about Sark now is that it's really quite easy to get good organic foods from from our neighbors, you know, like the hens are laying the eggs like just around the corner. So this is really perfect. That is what we are looking for. But it's the same or similar. It was similar in the other countries where we went to. So we tried to find not only the cultural food, the dishes, but also like the sustainable things. So I wouldn't generally say that nomadism is bad sustainable in terms of sustainability. Of course, I mean, it's the question how traveling will be also in the future, also with COVID now. So I think there will be few possibilities to fly also, because it will get more expensive. That's clear. And yeah, I mean, we bought a car, and in a way you could say this is also more sustainable than flying. So
Dominic,
yeah.
I think you've answered that superbly, and you make that key point about minimalism as well, because that was a theme that was repeated again in the earlier session.
Okay.
And in fact, I think we need a session on circular economies as well at some point. That's next.
It's a good idea.
David, over to you.
Well, this is the point in the movies when they say roll credits. And on behalf of John and I, I'd like to thank everyone who registered for this webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've certainly found it fascinating. I'd particularly like to say thank you to our panel, Louise Croft, Dominique Soulas, and Nigel Roberts. And also a special thanks to the Digital Greenhouse, and in particular Ben Ratton, for producing the event and providing all of the logistics. Finally, I'd like to thank John Buckland, whose idea it was to hold this event, and to James Ellsmore from Island Innovation for his continuing support. Thank you and good night.
Bye, everyone.
Night, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.